Hello, everyone. This is Mark Bentley. I'm the Executive Director of the Institute of Nonprofit Event Training. The Institute of Net, we exist to help nonprofits and the work that they do by specifically helping them plan more effective events, both through education and giving our time and services to help with the capacity that events take so much of. During this unprecedented time with COVID-19, we've been doing a series of webinars to be able to help you continue to engage your donors and hopefully get some sort of substitute for those canceled events, as well as being able to think through your event planning as it continues to go. So this webinar specifically today is about how to engage your donors without an event in 2020. We thought this would be a very timely as we've canceled those events and we're dependent on those donations. How do we continue to engage and try to get our donors to still support the needed work that we do as nonprofits? This class specifically, we're going to discuss some different strategies on how to connect with them. We'll go over a 4-step process and some helpful tips. Before we get into that, for those of you that are joining us for the first time, the Institute of Net, we exist to help nonprofits specifically through classes that we offer for nonprofits. Usually these are in-person classes, but during this time we've moved to this webinar series. We do consulting as well with nonprofits in a one-on-one format to really be able to help them think through their specific problems and situations that apply to their organization. And then we also do the event planning to be able to help them do better in their events so they can raise more funds and hopefully have more funds to be able to hire other services that they may need help in, as well as to apply more to their programs and overall operations. So as I mentioned, this webinar, we're going to talk about 4 helpful steps and a few helpful tips that we've thought through on how you should communicate with your donors in the midst of not having an event here in 2020. As we go through this webinar, if you have any questions, there is a Q&A option that I ask that you go ahead and write your question in. You can write that at any time, and we will answer that question and get to it in a timely manner. We also have time for questions at the end. And so, again, if you have any questions, fill in that. If we don't answer it during the webinar, we'll look through those and answer those at the end of this webinar. And as always, we have a giveaway that we give away 3 hours of free consulting, which is a full value of $300 to one of you watching this live. And for every person that watches, continues to watch these webinars for the next few weeks, you've been entered and to win a free event planning service, which is up to a $15,000 value that we will help instruct, consult, manage, execute, and plan your entire event. For you, or if you're watching this on behalf of a nonprofit that you support. And so the way we'll do that is a random drawing here coming up in a few weeks on May 15th. Every time you watch a webinar, you're entered again. So your odds increase as you continue to watch these webinars. So thank you for each of you that have been on and continue to engage as we work to be able to help you in the work that you're doing. So the other thing is there's a raise hand feature. If you really need to be able to put a pause and stop what we're doing, feel free to click on that if you have a question, and we'll try to get to that as much as we can. The 4 steps that we're going to talk about in this webinar, the first, create a plan. The second, express the need, or in other words, communicate. The third, give ideas. And the 4th is the follow-up. And so we'll dive through those. We hope to be done here in the next 45 minutes. And then again, we'll move to the Q&A portion. So let's move on to step 1. So step 1 is create a plan. Donors need to know that you have a plan. We all know this, but too often we don't do a great job of being able to really communicate and take the time to create this plan. Specifically, the reason that donors need to know you have a plan is that we've broken it down that we believe a plan will do three crucial things for a donor, specifically in how you communicate with them. They convey confidence, they give direction, and they show the need. So let's start with the conveying confidence. Donors give because they trust. They're not obviously going to give to you if they don't trust that what you say you're doing, you're actually doing. So if you say you're going to help someone, maybe it's a homeless ministry, then they're writing a check because they believe, that check will actually go to helping you in your homeless ministry. There are ways to build confidence and trust with the donor, and this is a very important piece of engaging your donors. So first thing as you're trying to connect with people is building that trust. Events are great with this because they're creating trust with the attendees by a couple ways. One, having a sense of community. If you attend an event and you're seeing, hundreds of other people support this organization and you see relationships that they clearly have, then you are understanding and seeing that, clearly they're doing what they're doing because so many other people are supporting them. I mean, it's just our natural subconscious thought, whether we process that or not. And so those are really helpful in building credibility and building trust. Another way is the events are something we can actually physically see and experience. We say this a lot in our event training curriculum that we go through, is that even though planning and running an event, let's talk about a fundraising banquet, may have nothing to do with actual programs you do. Maybe it's clean water in Africa. But yet, if the donor can never go and experience on site the work that you do in Africa, the only time they're experiencing you and your team at work is during this event and planning this event. And so what we normally teach is that, if your event is done in an excellent manner, then that's going to reflect in how you do your programs. If it's chaotic and unorganized, then they're going to assume that the programs are probably going to be chaotic and unorganized. So in the same way, as we build trust and we connect with donors seeing a physical event and seeing you in action is naturally building trust with them that you actually do work and that you are actually in action when they can't see the programs firsthand. So again, events are really helpful in conveying confidence. Well, our events have been canceled, right? So how do we still do that? It's still important to convey that confidence. Without an event, you're not able to build that trust. So instead, a good way is let's create a plan. A solid plan is crucial in showing how point A, their check, gets to point B, which maybe in the first example would be feeding homeless. With a well laid out graphic and a solid plan, you're building trust with that donor. So again, if you can say, listen, we've processed this, we've created a plan, we know where we're going this year, I would even suggest creating a 5 and a 10-year plan. It shows that donor that you've processed the current situation, that you are doing work, and you're giving them something physical to look out by having a laid out plan that then they can process and trust the work that you're doing, which is conveying confidence for them. So as you create a plan, the first reason it's so crucial is you're able to convey confidence with your donors. The second reason is they give direction. So similar to giving confidence, you're building credibility by showing the direction you're going in and that you have thought about COVID-19 and know where to go. Again, donors want to make sure that you're handling the situation and you're being proactive in your direction, as well as, of course, being a little reactive. But they don't want you always playing catch up. They want you to be able to think strategically ahead so you can be a healthy and a growing organization. So having a plan, it shows that you have a direction, that you know where you're going, that you're not being reactive to the current situation all the time, but rather you've created a plan to move forward and trying to be proactive as much as you can in times of uncertainty, which we are certainly in. Everything is uncertain right now, as I mentioned, but we can find comfort and direction. So again, not only are things uncertain for you and your organization, but this is a unique situation being a worldwide pandemic where almost everyone is in a very similar boat and situation. So they know how uncertain things are. Their own organizations, their own plans have been just uprooted and totally changed. And we find comfort in knowing what is familiar and what can we continue to be able to invest our time and know where we can fall back if things get tough. So again, having a plan and having a direction specifically creates comfort in that. Having that direction that donors can see and understand and be able to process. So show donors you're on top of it by giving a direction for both your team and your donors to follow along with. Again, we're talking about how to communicate to your donors, but just know this plan is extremely crucial as well for you to be able to make sure your team is moving in the right place. Now, if you create a plan and it changes here in 8 days even because something new has come out or something unknown has come out, that's okay. There's no harm in that. It's not going to hurt you in any way. It will hurt you though if you don't create a plan and you try to move forward without it. So again, the plan, it gives direction. And then the final one is they show the need. There are a lot of needs out there right now. I mean, there's always, I would argue, a ton of needs out in the world, but now it's so much more prevalent and known. I mean, just reading articles about the current unemployment rate and just, organizations that are constantly having to shut down. We assume that most people have a need due to COVID-19, but a plan helps spell out that need so there is no longer an assumption for the donor, but an understanding. Understanding builds confidence. So again, your donors are going to assume that you have needs based on COVID-19, but if you have that plan laid out, you took the assumption out, and now they know for sure what your needs are based on this plan and how you need help to be able to attack it. So again, what you're doing is you're building confidence within that plan. So as we communicate to our donors, let's reflect on the first step here, which is create a plan. I can't express this enough. It's not okay to put a well-written email with a half-baked plan or a very vague and ambiguous thoughts and phrases and words and a cherry on top type of response. Rather, a thorough, well thought out, deep-rooted plan that we can connect with our donors on is going to be crucial in this first step of creating confidence and conveying the confidence that they should have in you that events usually will bring that you're not going to be able to get to without your event this year. So that's step one. Step two, express the need or communicate. It seems obvious, but we're going to talk a little bit more about specifically how we should be able to do this. So now that you have a plan, you've got to communicate it. You've got to let your donors know. Err on the side of over communicating. Again, if you have to pick between under communicating and over communicating, you rather over communicate. You want your donors to know what is this plan and that you have a direction. One way that can help you make sure that you communicate it well, but also mix it up a little bit, is to use different ways to communicate it. So, look at the email and sending them a nice email, putting on your social media with Twitter and Facebook, sending them postal service mail as well as the email. Don't just pick one and assume that checks the box, but continue to communicate in these various ways, even the same message over and over and over again. Another thing to keep in mind is use different communication methods. So create videos, create stories, create infographics, create testimonials, do it in an easy bullet point laid out way. Communicate the same thing, but be able to do it in all these various communication methods. And different people hear things and engage with different things. So someone may not pay attention to your story, but they'll watch a video, or they may not pay attention to your testimonial, but they'll peruse through an infographic. So be able to think through different communication methods as you continue to communicate this plan that you have and the needs that you have, and figure out how creatively can you keep saying the same thing in a way that mixes it up. If you send someone an email every day for 2 weeks, that's going to get old. But if you send them an email on Monday and then do Twitter and Facebook on Tuesday, and then they receive a letter in the mail on Thursday, and then there's a video that goes out on Friday, you're still communicating to them, but you're mixing it up. And so it doesn't seem as tiring or as redundant as really it is. And then the final thing along that is you've got to keep sharing the same thing. So stick to your message, stay focused, and be consistent in your communication. Once you have your plan, continue to stick to the plan and communicate that plan. Share, this is what our need is, and continue to pound that home. It's not okay just to send one email and just trust that it landed and then move on. This is a time of uncertainty. This is a time where we're distracted by a lot of things, but we also have unique ways to engage with a lot of things. And so continuing to communicate the same message is going to be valuable. So that's step 2, is express the need or communicate. Step 3, give ideas. This is where I really feel like a lot of nonprofits and people in general miss the point, is we assume that the donors will have the best intention in mind and will process what we're communicating to them, and then will, in return, be able to give us whatever they can offer. Sometimes that happens. But the reality is, and I know this is even for my own self when people ask me, is that if they ask me for something, I'm going to process exactly what they asked and not anything else. So another way to look at it is there may be other ways that your donors can support you, but unless you give them the ideas and give them the specific ways that they can help, they might not actually think about those ways that they can support you. So for example, let's say that their company is really hurting during this time and they can't give financially like they normally do. If you ask them to give financially, they may say, no, we just can't right now. But instead, if you ask them, hey, I know you have a vacation house, would you be willing to donate a week of that so we can auction that off and create some revenue? For them, if that's not competing with any other type of revenue or, other things that they have going on, that may be an easy ask, and they may be willing to say yes to that. And so there may be things like that people are willing to do that they won't come to that conclusion on their own, but you need to make sure that you give them those ideas. So as you communicate and as you create the plan and convey the confidence and continue to engage them, give them the call to actions or the way to respond by giving them unique ideas. Don't just ask for them to write a check. Something I always say is, remember that when someone does not write you a check or does not make a donation, it doesn't mean they don't want to help. Too often, especially at fundraising events, if someone doesn't respond at that event, they come to the event, they enjoy it, and we're disappointed because we really thought Billy Bob was going to write a check and he didn't. A lot of times we just assume he's not interested. He doesn't want to support the cause. This isn't his cause or whatever it is. But unfortunately, things are usually not that simple. And so let's not assume no for people, but rather instead, until we get a firm no, continue to engage. Some people might not write checks because maybe Billy Bob came to your banquet without his spouse present. And maybe he didn't want to make a financial commitment without talking to her. Maybe they couldn't give right now. They just invested in a company or made a big donation or have some issues with work. But maybe in 3 months, things will turn around, or even 6 months at the end of the year, things will turn around and he's willing to give again. So if you write that off as a no and you don't continue to engage him until he gives you a firm no, then you're missing out on an opportunity that could become something. So the same idea with giving ideas is, if you ask someone for support and they say no, and specifically you're asking for a financial donation, don't just assume they're not willing to help. Instead, try to think creatively and how can we continue to engage this person in a way that they can still support the work that we're doing, and would be more reasonable for them. Maybe it's volunteering, or one thing I wrote in there is the CARES Act check, that people right now are getting a check and not everyone needs the check. I always say the check is not discriminatory based on industry. There's some industries that are thriving right now and people are keeping their jobs and they're still getting a check as long as they fall within the financial threshold. And so people like that may be willing to donate their check, but you've got to be very clear in spelling it out in the way that you communicate to suggest, here's one way that you can support the work we're doing. If you have a CARES Act check and you're willing, and you don't need it all, would you consider giving part or all of that check to our work? And this is how it'll help. And you can then go into your plan, which conveys the confidence. So again, give ideas to your donors. This is really important. Don't assume that they're going to figure out the best conclusion on how to help you if they can't help you in the way that you ask. All right, and then step 4, the follow-up. So this really goes back to step 2, but essentially continue to follow up. So when we talk about communicating, one thing I put in there is, you err on the side of over communicating in step 2. So after you send your initial plan out or request to people or whatever it is, continue to follow up. I would follow up until you get a no. Goes back to my last point. Don't assume no until they tell you no. Don't assume they'll take the initiative, but get creative in your follow-up. So another thing is, I see this a lot, and I'm speaking from experience on this side, where I may receive a request for a donation or whatever it might be, and I actually, generally am considering it. I'm thinking this is something I'd like to support, but I'd like to talk to my wife first. Well, life gets busy. I continue on. I put it on my desk, or it falls down in my inbox, in my email, and then I forget to talk to her about it. And if I get a follow-up, then it'll be a good refresher to say, oh, shoot, I still need to talk to my wife on this. And that will negate something that I may just forget completely, and it may not be a priority for me. And I see nonprofits too often, again, say they don't want to bombard people. And I appreciate the sentiment in that. But following up in this scenario is something I actually appreciate. I want to help out, and I would be frustrated if I forgot to do it. But being realistic is just not a priority with other things I may have going on right then. So you following up is actually something that's beneficial to me, to remind me to go and have that conversation and then submit the donation. So the follow-up is, again, or the communication is more than just one initial communication and one initial follow-up. Use discernment, don't bombard people, but err on the side of over communicating. So continue to follow up as much as you think is reasonable. Again, use different platforms to follow up. I had a client one time that we would have all these email threads going back and forth, and he was copied on all of them, and he would just almost never respond. And for whatever reason, he just never checked his email. But anything over text message, I'd get a response right away. So if you're going to send a mass email out to everyone, there may be someone that would truly want to respond, but email may not be the best for them. And so maybe it's a text message to them. Maybe it's, the snail mail for them or the social media. So continue to engage and follow up with different communicating models, and don't assume that they'll take the initiative, but get creative in your follow-up. Get creative in how you respond and engage with them. Okay, so those are the 4 steps that we think are important in how to engage your donors without an event in 2020. Some of you may say, we're already doing that, and that's great. There's no silver bullet here. There's no magical formula, but what there is a well-developed plan. This is a plan to follow up, just like the plan that you need to create and how you're going to move forward as an organization. And so create a well-developed plan and then stay disciplined to it. So many well-intended and well-meaning nonprofits create plans. Life gets busy. They're so busy with programs and this and that and everything else, and maybe this isn't their strong point, and then they don't stay disciplined to following up and executing the plan. And so create a timeline, create deadlines, and make sure that you stay true to getting that done. If not, the plan is not going to be nearly as impactful, if it'll be impactful at all. So the next thing, and the final thing to close out this webinar before we go into a Q&A, is just talking about some helpful tips as you're communicating to donors as well. The first is be transparent. Donors will help if there is a need, so don't be afraid to express it. Again, we don't have to come to donors with our lipstick on and all polished and ready to go. Sometimes we can come to donors in a very real, authentic, transparent way. And I would argue that can be even more effective than the former. Think of, fundraising events. We try to get as much polished up as we can. We want to make sure the numbers look as good as they can. Everything runs smoothly. And you should. I mean, you should be honest and in your communication, accurate, but you also should do it in a very effective way. So same here, be effective in how you do it, but don't be afraid to be transparent and to say during COVID-19, we've been really hit hard because we've lost this fundraising event, which cost us a net of $40,000. And so we're working hard to see how can we recover this. This is our plan moving forward. Would you consider either one, donating a check to be able to support this, or two, donate a vacation house to our auction as we try to get creative in seeking to make up these funds. So there you've been able to lay it out. You're transparent with them. You convey the plan. You gave them ideas, and you're able to make your ask. So be transparent. The next tip is you do not have because you do not ask. Again, so many nonprofits I work with, I see this as being a truth for them, where for whatever reason, they don't feel comfortable asking donors either for a gift in a different way or even a larger gift. There's one organization that hired me a few years ago to help them with a golf tournament they had done for about 20 years. And they had a lot of success with the golf tournament. I think they netted around 30 or 40,000 each year. And we worked with them, and essentially we offered 2 to 3 consulting sessions that we just came in and just asked a bunch of questions, looked at all their information for the golf tournament, files and documents from past years, and we're able to analyze it and give suggestions based on our recommendations. One of the suggestions that we offered was looking at their list of donors. I asked, why does this donor always give $5,000? Or why does this donor always give $1,000? And the response was, that's what we asked for. And so I challenged them. I said, this donor, I'm pretty sure has the capacity to give above and beyond that. So why don't you ask this donor, instead of $5,000, that he'd consider $7,500 this year, and that $1,000 donor that he'd consider $1,500 this year, and so on and so forth. And they were able to do that and raise many thousands of dollars more for their organization by just asking the same donors to give a little bit more. They have the capacity. They clearly love the organization and support the cause. They needed a reason why, which we gave them one and supported it with the plan and the overall work that the organization is doing. But we just asked for a little bit more. And this donor that had been supporting it for 5-10 years at the same level was willing to increase their donation. So it's a great principle, but something we need to continue to remember is you do not have because you do not ask. So don't be afraid to go to those donors and ask for a little bit more. One model we love to do with our clients is the ask 10% more idea, where maybe at the end of the year, for your end of the year giving, you ask everyone who gave last year if they would give again, plus a 10% increase. For a $100 donor, that's $10 more. A $1,000 donor, that's $100 more. So it's not significant for those donors, but for you, 10% on, let's say, a $300,000 budget, that's a $30,000 extra you raised from the same group of donors. So don't be afraid to ask and be strategic in how you ask. The final helpful tip is do your research. This is a great sales model for those of you who may have a sales background, is don't be afraid to be able to do your research and engage who your donors are and their current situation. So this is, I think, more important now than ever with the coronavirus, is before you reach out to a donor, let's say it's a donor that supported you the last few years and you're gonna ask them for funds again, do some research into what his company is. Let's say he's a business owner or a director or executive at a company, or she is, and figure out what his or her industry and company is like right now. Are they in a company that is essentially shut down right now? Are they a restaurant owner? Or are they going to be someone who's actually thriving right now? Are they a grocery store owner or a home improvement store owner or something like that that's doing actually really well right now? And so be able to do your research into the work that they do, and then be able to analyze and create assessments on what you think that they can give or their capacity of giving and how it's changed from the past year. So again, look at the industry, figure out, is COVID-19 impacting them? And how has that changed their giving capacity? Do they typically give through a donor fund as well, a donor advised fund? This is really crucial right now. So if you're not familiar with the donor advised fund, it's essentially a nonprofit that's set up that donors can make gifts to, and they have a fund within it that gift sits in. And then later on, they can grant that gift out from there to the nonprofit they want to support. So it's almost like a holding account for it. The IRS allows this and is a helpful tool for large donors to be able to put their funds in a place that they can get the tax write-off immediately, but decide later on where they want to disperse those funds to. And so again, think of a business owner that just sold his business and has a large chunk of cash that he, for tax reasons, is giving to a 501c3. That's a great example where he'll put it in that fund, but maybe he hasn't done the research yet to be able to give those gifts to the nonprofits that he wants to. And so he wants to take a little bit more time to do that. And so he's going to wait and then grant it out from that donor advised fund. The reason that's very important right now is if you have donors that consistently give through donor advised funds, the odds are those funds are still have funds available in them. So, maybe this will impact their giving next year, but the odds are whatever's in their donor advised fund is from their past year's worth of business or salary or however that they make their money. And they probably have a way that they consistently put funds into this donor advised fund, whether it's on a monthly, a quarterly, or a yearly basis. And the odds are, if they're a larger donor, so several thousand or above, they probably have a good chunk of money sitting in that donor advised fund. I would venture to say, $50,000 or above. And so because of this, even though their industry or their company may be shut down right now, they still may be able to have the capacity to give. With a donor advised fund, you can't liquidate those funds into another purpose. It's not like a retirement account or something like that where you have to pay a penalty, but then you can use those funds in other ways. Those funds have to be given to a 501c3. And so this is a great time for you to engage that person, and goes back to point 3 or step 3 about giving ideas. And when you ask for them, ask for the gift to see if they have funds in their donor advised fund they'd be willing to support the work that you guys are doing in the midst of COVID-19. Okay, guys, well, that is our helpful tips. Let's do a quick recap, and then we'll go into any questions. Feel free to go ahead and submit your questions if you have any. If you're watching this webinar after the fact, then please feel free to email me, mark@instituteofnet.com. That's MARK @instituteofnet.com. And I'd be happy to answer those. We're happy to help with any consulting that any of you may require. And thinking about your own events, there's so much more that we can dive into with specific situations on how to communicate to your donors. Think about within your donors, segment them out. You're not going to communicate to all donors the exact same way. So don't be afraid to think through on how to generally communicate to your donors, and then tweak it for each of your individual donors and how you communicate with them. Some maybe are part of a mass email, and some get a very personal, individualized email, as well as other means of communication. So be able to think through that and segment out your donors and how you communicate with them. But feel free to reach out to us with any questions you have or any ways that we can help you in the work that you're doing. So a recap on this webinar, what we talked about is the 4 steps about how to engage your donors without having an event in 2020. The first step is create a plan. Donors need to know that you have a plan. Plans do 3 things for a donor. They convey confidence, they give direction, they show the need. Step 2 is express the need, communicate. Now that you have a plan, you've got to be able to communicate it. Err on the side of over communicating. Use different ways to communicate. Use different communication methods. Use videos, testimonials, stories, infographics. Continue to engage in different ways, but keep sharing the same thing. Stick to your message, stay focused, and be consistent in your communication. Step 3 is give ideas. Give them the ideas and the ways they can help. So again, people have good intentions, but they don't always sit down to critically think and process what your requests are. And so one of the ways you can combat that is by helping them, by giving the idea for them, where all they need to do is process it and say yes. So again, if maybe they can't get financially, but they have a vacation house they would be willing to offer for you to auction off. Think of unique ideas like that that you can engage people. And always remember that someone not writing a check doesn't mean they don't want to help. Um, Always engage until you get a firm no. And then step 4, the final step, is follow up. So don't assume that they'll take the initiative, but get creative in your follow up. Continue to engage them until you get a response, because their intention may be to help, but if you don't have a consistent engagement with them, then they may not actually get back to you. All right, friends. Well, that is our seminar here. And we appreciate all of you that have joined us and continue to join us. Let me give away our giveaway real quick. And then, like I said, everyone that is on this webinar are going to be entered into our drawing come May 15th for the $15,000 event planning service. The winner for this giveaway is going to be Sarah Munson. So Sarah, congrats on winning the 3 hours of consulting. I will shoot you an email on more information on that. And then we can connect more. For any of you that need consulting or help as well, please let me know. And we would love to be able to connect and help you guys as much as possible. Thank you all for watching this webinar and for your constant support during this time. We love you and all the work that each of you do, and continue to be blessed by hopefully your donors as you communicate with them, and feel free to reach out with any questions. Have a great day.